The snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, as if the sky itself were weaving a shroud of white over the world. Irina, the winter witch, walked through the hushed forest, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. Her staff of frost crystal clicked softly against the frozen ground, and her breath curled in silver tendrils in the icy air. She had lived in these lands for centuries. Her magic entwined with the frost and the wind, and she had long since ceased to be surprised by the ways of winter. But that day, something was different. The first note drifted to her like a whisper, almost lost amid the sigh of the wind in the pines. It was a sound she had never heard before, neither the mournful howl of the northern gales, nor the brittle crack of ice beneath a traveller's feet. No, this was something alive, something warm. Curious, Irina followed the melody, her senses sharpening with each step. The song grew stronger, its notes rich and haunting, resonating in her chest like the memory of a summer day long forgotten. The forest seemed to respond to the music. The trees stood straighter, their frosted boughs glittering as if caught in a spell. Even the snow underfoot softened, its icy crust melting into a delicate powder. She emerged into a clearing bathed in pale light. There, in the center of the glade, stood the source of the song, a deer. But not like any creature Irina had ever seen. Its coat was white as the purest snow, shimmering faintly as though dusted with starlight. Its antlers arched high and graceful, their curves studded with crystals that refracted the dim light into 1,000 fleeting rainbows. The deer's eyes, deep and knowing, met hers, and the song faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the world itself had paused. "You sing," Irina said, her voice as soft as the snow. The deer tilted its head, as if weighing her words. "I do," it replied, its voice resonant, yet strangely musical, each syllable carrying the echo of its melody. "And you, I sense, are no ordinary wanderer." Irina allowed herself the faintest of smiles. I am the winter witch, keeper of these lands." The deer dipped its head, a gesture that spoke of respect. "I am Lumia," it said. "I sing to the frost, to the trees, to the earth that slumbers beneath this endless winter. My song holds the warmth the world has forgotten, though it is only borrowed light." "Borrowed?" Lumia's gaze shifted skyward. "A gift from a distant star long ago. Its light resides in my voice, granting me the power to temper winter's cruelty." Irina regarded the creature with a mix of wonder and caution. Magic, she knew, always came with a price. But there was no malice in Lumia's presence, only a quiet resolve. "And why have you come to my lands?" "These lands call to me," Lumia said simply. "There is a heaviness here, a cold that runs deeper than the season itself. My song can bring warmth, but it cannot last. I go where I am needed, though my time in any place is fleeting. Something in his words stirred an ache within Irina, though she could not name its source. For all her magic, for all her years, she had never considered the cost of winter to those who lived beneath its weight. "Then we are alike," she said at last. "You bring warmth to the frozen world, and I keep its harshness from swallowing it whole. Perhaps together we can do more." Lumir regarded her for a long moment, his crystalline antlers catching the light. Then he nodded. "Perhaps we can." From that day, they traveled as one. Irina's magic and Lumir's song worked in harmony, weaving paths of life through the frozen expanse. Wherever they went, frost softened, rivers thawed, and the hearts of those they passed seemed lighter for their presence. But Irina could not ignore the faint tremor in Lumir's voice as the days grew longer. Nor could she ignore the lingering silence that followed each song, a silence that felt more like an ending than a pause. And so, even as they brought hope to the frozen lands, the Winter Witch began to feel the first threads of unease tugging at her heart. Something was changing, something was fading, and she knew, with the certainty of frost settling on still water, that their journey together was only just beginning. The wind carried whispers of frost as Irina and Lumir made their way through the frozen expanse, their bond strengthening with each step. Lumir's song had become a constant companion, its warmth breaking winter's chill wherever they traveled. Villages once shrouded in despair grew brighter at their passing. Frozen rivers awoke, flowing in silver ribbons, while forests once bowed under the weight of frost reached skyward again. But the melody began to shift. At first, Irina thought it was her imagination, a slight quaver in the notes, a breath of hesitation where once there had been unwavering strength. But as the days stretched into weeks, the change became undeniable. The warmth in Lumir's song waned, as if it was struggling to hold its place in the world. One evening, as they rested beneath the shadow of an ancient pine, Lumir's voice faltered mid-song. The silence that followed was sharper than the cold, and Irina turned to him with concern etched in her silvered eyes. "You've stopped," she said softly, though the question lingered unspoken in her tone. Lumir's luminous antlers dimmed as he lowered his head. "The song, it is slipping from me," he confessed, his voice heavy with resignation. "Each note takes more than it gives, as if the light within me is dwindling." Irina knelt beside him, her frost crystal staff casting faint shadows across the snow. "Why is this happening?" Lumir lifted his gaze to the night sky, where the stars flickered faintly above the storm-swept peaks. "The light I carry is not mine. It was given to me long ago by a star whose heart burned brighter than any other. But stars, too, are bound by time. The one that gave me its gift has grown dim, eclipsed by the unrelenting frost that grips these lands. Irina's heart tightened, though she gave no outward sign. The ancient truths of magic and balance stirred uneasily within her. If the star fades, can its light not be rekindled? There is a way, Lumir said, after a long pause, his voice heavy with both hope and dread. The star still exists, its essence hidden deep within the mountains, where winter is most unforgiving. But the path is perilous, and the cost of such a journey is one that cannot be foreseen. The words hung between them, a delicate thread of uncertainty woven into the stillness. Irina stared into the distance, her gaze fixed on the towering peaks that loomed like ghostly sentinels at the horizon. The mountains, cloaked in storms and silence, were said to hold secrets even she dared not uncover. But this was no ordinary plight. "Then we must go," she said, her voice as firm as the frost underfoot. "If your song fades, so too will the light you bring. Winter will stretch its claws over these lands, and no magic of mine will hold it back forever." Lumir hesitated, his antlers casting faint prisms of light onto the snow. "I cannot ask this of you, Winter Witch. The mountains are treacherous, and the price of such a journey may be greater than either of us can bear." "You did not ask," Irina replied, rising to her full height, her cloak billowing softly in the icy wind. "And yet I will go. You are tied to this land, as am I. If I let you fade, I let the land fall into despair." For a moment, Lumir was silent, his crystalline antlers trembling faintly in the starlight. Then he bowed his head. "Very well, but know this. What lies ahead is unlike anything you have faced before. The heart of winter is a place untouched by even the faintest warmth. It will test us in ways we cannot yet imagine." Irina did not falter. "Then let it test us. We will endure." That night, as the frost crept in around their camp, Irina lay awake, her thoughts drifting toward the journey ahead. She felt the faint hum of her magic within her veins, a power that had sustained her for centuries. And yet, for the first time, she wondered if it would be enough. Lumir slept fitfully, his breath shallow and his glow diminished. Even in slumber, his presence was a reminder of the fragile balance they sought to preserve. Irina watched over him, the frost-laden winds howling softly around them. The mountains awaited, their jagged peaks veiled in storms and mystery. The stars' light, dim and distant, called to them like a whisper through the endless snow. As dawn broke, pale and cold, Irina stood and tightened her cloak. She glanced once more at Lumir, whose dim light flickered faintly in the shadows. Then, together, they turned their faces to the mountains, where the true heart of winter lay waiting. The mountains rose like slumbering giants, their jagged peaks tearing into the pale sky. Storms circled their summits, dark and brooding, while snow swept down their slopes in relentless cascades. Irina and Lumia stood at the base of this frozen labyrinth, their breath visible in the frigid air. Neither spoke. Words seemed small in the face of such enormity. The path they chose was narrow, winding through a canyon carved by ancient glaciers. The air grew colder with each step, the snow beneath their feet giving way to jagged ice that gleamed like shards of broken mirrors. Above them, the wind howled, its mournful voice echoing off the icy walls. Irina moved with deliberate care, her frost crystal staff glowing faintly in the gloom. She cast wards around them, shimmering barriers of magic that pushed back the worst of the storm. But even her power had limits. The farther they climbed, the more the wind tore at her spells, unraveling them like loose threads. Lumia followed close behind, his hooves finding purchase on the treacherous ground. His antlers, once radiant, had dimmed to a pale glow, casting faint shadows on the canyon walls. His song, too, was muted. The melody that had once brought life now little more than a whisper. As they ascended, the landscape grew harsher. Ice formations jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient beast, and the air was thick with a cold that seemed to seep into their very souls. Strange shapes moved at the edges of their vision, shadows that vanished when they turned to look. "The mountains are alive," Lumia murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. "They watch, and they remember." Irina did not reply, but she felt it too. A presence, vast and unyielding, woven into the fabric of the ice itself. It pressed against her senses, a weight that grew heavier with every step. Hours turned into days, though time seemed meaningless in this frozen void. Their progress was slow, the path twisting and turning without end. At times, they came upon remnants of past travelers, broken sleds, tattered cloaks, frozen into the snow, a single boot half buried in the ice. Each relic was a silent testament to the mountain's unforgiving nature. One night, as they made camp in the shelter of an overhanging glacier, Irina turned to Lumia. "Tell me of the star," she said. Her voice steady but quiet. Lumia lifted his head, his dim light reflecting off the ice. It was long ago, in the time before winter's grasp tightened on this world. The star was a beacon, its light warm and endless. When the frost began to spread, it chose me as its vessel, granting me its glow so that I might temper the cold. He paused, his voice heavy with memory. But even stars are not eternal. Its heart began to fade, and I became its last remnant. Now, I fear its essence is buried deep within these peaks, eclipsed by the cold it once sought to quell. Irina studied him for a long moment. "If we find it, if we restore its light, will you be whole again?" Lumia hesitated, his gaze distant. "Perhaps, but such power does not come without cost. To rekindle the star is to awaken forces older than time. The mountains will not yield their treasure easily. As if in answer, a distant rumble echoed through the canyon. The glacier beneath them trembled, and shards of ice fell like frozen tears. Irina rose, her staff glowing with readiness. Then we must be prepared for whatever comes. The next day, the true challenge began. They reached a narrow pass, its entrance guarded by towering spires of ice. As they stepped through, the wind died abruptly, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. From the shadows emerged a figure, a sentinel of jagged ice, its form shifting and gleaming with every movement. It was neither human nor beast, but something primordial, its essence bound to the mountain itself. Its eyes, twin orbs of frozen fire, locked onto them. "You seek the star," it intoned, its voice deep and resonant, echoing as though it came from the depths of the earth. "You are not worthy." Irina stepped forward, her staff raised. "We mean no harm. We seek to restore what was lost, to bring balance to this land." The sentinel's gaze lingered on her, then shifted to Lumia. "The song is weak. The light fades. Turn back, or be consumed by the mountain's wrath." "We cannot turn back," Lumia said, his voice firm despite its fragility. "Without the star's light, winter will consume all." The sentinel let out a low growl, a sound like ice groaning under pressure. Then it attacked. Shards of ice flew toward them, sharp and unrelenting. Irina raised her staff, casting a barrier that shattered on impact, but bought them precious seconds. Lumire's antlers glowed faintly, and he let out a single trembling note, a fragment of his song that sent ripples through the air. The sentinel faltered, its movement slowing. Irina seized the opportunity, her magic weaving through the cracks in his icy form. With a final burst of power, the sentinel froze, its body crystallizing into a jagged monument. The pass was clear, but Irina staggered, her breath labored. Lumia stepped beside her, his light flickering. "The mountain tests us," he said softly. "And we will endure," Irina replied, her resolve unbroken. They pressed on, the heart of winter drawing ever closer. The air grew still as Irina and Lumia stepped into the cavern. A silence so complete it pressed against their ears. The walls glimmered with blue ice, refracting the faint light from Irina's staff into ghostly patterns that danced across the floor. The cavern seemed alive, its crystalline surfaces pulsing faintly as if echoing the heartbeat of the mountain itself. At its center floated the star. Suspended in the air, the star was a shard of light encased in ice. Its brilliance, though diminished, was undeniable, an ethereal glow that bathed the chamber in a pale luminescence. Threads of warmth radiated from it, faint and fragile, but enough to remind Irina of spring breezes and summer rains, memories so distant they felt like dreams. Lumia took a step forward, his hooves clinking softly against the icy ground. His antlers shimmered faintly in the star's glow, the first spark of vitality they had shown in days. But as he approached, the cavern trembled. From the shadows emerged a presence, a figure born of frost and storm. It rose from the icy floor, its form massive and jagged, its body sculpted from the mountain itself. A crown of frozen spines adorned its head, and its eyes burned with cold fire. "The heart of winter is not yours to take," the guardian intoned, its voice a rumble that seemed to shake the very air. Irina stepped forward, her staff raised. "We seek to restore the star's light, not to steal it. Without its warmth, this land will fall to unending frost." The guardian's gaze bore into her, its expression inscrutable. "The star is the mountain's soul. Its light binds the frost to these peaks, keeping the balance between warmth and cold. To disturb it is to awaken forces that should remain at rest." Lumiere lowered his head, his voice soft but resolute. "The balance has already shifted. The frost has crept beyond the mountains, swallowing the land below. Without the star's light, there will be no balance, only death." For a moment, the guardian was silent, its immense form still as the ice it was born from. Then it spoke, its voice tinged with something akin to regret. "To rekindle the star is to demand sacrifice. Its light may be restored, but such power cannot come without cost. One of you must offer what cannot be replaced." Irina's grip tightened on her staff. She had known deep down that the star's light could not be restored without a price. Magic, like life, was never freely given. Loomis stepped forward, his gaze steady. "Take what remains of my song," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It was born of the star's light, and it can return to it. If that is the price, I will pay it." "No." Irina's voice cut through the cavern like the crack of ice. She turned to Lumia, her silver eyes fierce. "Your song is the hope of these lands. Without it, the frost will return, no matter what light the star holds." Lumia looked at her, his expression pained. "And what would you give, Winter Witch? Your magic? Your life? Can this land endure the frost without your protection?" Irina did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the guardian, her gaze unwavering. "If sacrifice is required, then let it be mine. My magic, my connection to this frost-laden world. It is a part of me, but it is not all of me. Take it, and let the star shine again." The guardian regarded her for a long moment, its frozen features unreadable. Then it nodded. A slow, deliberate motion. "Very well. The star's light will be rekindled, but your magic will be bound to it, and you will be forever diminished." Irina stepped forward, her resolve unbroken. She placed her frost crystal staff at the base of the star and began to weave her spell. The ice around the star glowed brighter, its surface cracking and melting as her magic poured into it. Threads of frost and light intertwined, each strand a fragment of her power, her essence. The star pulsed, its light growing stronger, brighter. The cavern was bathed in a warm golden glow that pushed back the cold, filling the space with a warmth that seemed to hum with life itself. Irina staggered, her star flickering dimly as the last of her magic flowed into the star. Lumir rushed to her side, his antlers now radiant, his song returning in a melody so clear and strong it seemed to fill the air with 1,000 unspoken promises. The guardian bowed its head, its form dissolving back into the ice. "The balance is restored," it said, its voice fading. "May the light guide you." As the cavern stilled, Irina leaned heavily on Lumia, her strength waning but her heart steady. The star shone above them, its warmth a beacon in the endless frost. "It is done," she whispered. Her Lumia pressed his antlers against her, his glow enveloping them both. "You gave what I could not," he said softly. "The world will not forget." Together, they turned from the cavern, the light of the rekindled star casting their shadows long against the ice. The heart of winter was no longer silent, and the song of life echoed once more. The descent from the heart of winter was a journey through transformation. Where before the mountain had been cold and hostile, now the ice seemed to shimmer with life. The once biting wind softened, its howl replaced by the gentle murmur of thawing streams. Irina leaned heavily on Lumia, her strength diminished, her steps slow. The flicker of her frost crystal staff was faint, its power almost extinguished. Yet the star's light had returned. As they passed through the icy pass where the sentinel had once stood, they found its frozen form changed. No longer a jagged monolith of frost, it now glimmered with golden veins, its edges softened by warmth. Irina paused, her hand brushing its surface. Beneath her touch, the ice hummed faintly, a low, resonant sound that seemed almost like gratitude. "Even the mountain remembers," Lumia said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the journey they had undertaken. "It should," Irina replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "This place bore witness to sacrifice. That kind of memory lingers." As they continued downward, the changes became more profound. The snow underfoot grew softer, its icy crust melting into slush. In the lower valleys, rivers once locked in unyielding frost now flowed freely, their waters sparkling under the stars' renewed glow. The air, though still cold, carried the faint scent of earth and pine, a promise that the land, long dormant, was beginning to awaken. Villages greeted them with awe. The people, once bowed under the weight of endless frost, now stood taller, their faces lit with hope. They marveled at Lumir, his antlers radiant, his song restored. And though Irina's steps faltered and her silver eyes seemed dimmer, They bowed to her with reverence, whispering thanks for a sacrifice they could only sense but not fully understand. Yet Irina's thoughts were not of thanks. They were of balance. They reached the glade where they had first met, a place now transformed. The snow that had once blanketed the clearing had receded, revealing patches of green that shimmered with frost-kissed dew. Lumia stepped into the clearing, his hooves leaving faint imprints in the softened ground. "You've done what even I thought impossible," he said, his voice tinged with wonder. "We've done it," Irina corrected, though her voice carried a shadow of weariness. She lowered herself to a fallen log, her frost crystal staff resting across her knees. Its once brilliant glow was now a faint flicker, and she could feel the emptiness where her magic had once thrummed. "What will you do now?" Lumia asked, his gaze steady. Irina looked out over the clearing, her expression thoughtful. "The land no longer needs my magic. The star will hold the frost in check, and your song will bring warmth where it is needed. My role in this has ended." Lumia stepped closer, his radiant antlers casting faint light over her. "And yet, you remain. Why?" Irina smiled faintly, her silver eyes meeting his. "Because even in the absence of magic, there is work to be done. Balance is not a single act, Lumia. It is a constant weaving, a thread that must be tended. My power is diminished, but I am still the Winter Witch, and winter, for all its cold, is not without purpose." Lumia's song swelled softly, a melody of understanding and gratitude. It filled the glade, carrying with it the echoes of thawing streams and blooming wildflowers. In the years that followed, the tale of the Winter Witch and the singing deer became legend. The star, its light rekindled, continued to cast its glow over the mountains, holding the frost in balance. Lumia roamed the land, his song bringing warmth to those in need, his antlers a beacon of hope, and Irina remained. Though her magic was faint, she wove her presence into the rhythms of the land. She walked among the forests and valleys, her staff guiding her steps. The frost no longer answered her as it once had, but the earth spoke to her in other ways, in the shifting of the seasons, in the whispers of the wind, in the soft murmur of rivers flowing free. On cold nights, when the stars burned bright above the snow-laden peaks, villagers would gather to tell the story. They spoke of a witch who had given her magic to save the world, and of a deer whose song could awaken even the coldest heart. They called it a tale of sacrifice and hope, of balance and renewal. But in the quiet of the glade, where the snow met the first green of spring, Irina and Lumia knew the truth. It was not just a tale. It was the song of the land, the harmony of frost and fire, life and stillness, and it was theirs to tend, for as long as the world remembered. The Winter Witch and the singing deer, guardians of balance, keepers of light, the song endured.